One of my biggest influences as a band and also the guitar player from that band is Rush. And it's probably, if I had to name like my favorite band, it would be them. Mm. And I think some of the things that I really picked up from Alex are how to make the guitar sound really, really big. And obviously Rush is a trio, and I use that a lot, I'm finding now, when I play solo, when it's just me and bass and drums. I'm able to take that knowledge and make the trio sound big. Some of the things I learned from him are just to make the chords bigger, add ninths to it, and try to use all the strings. Playing a C, instead of doing it that way, I'll add the 9 on top, play the 5th below. So whenever I go to that chord, I have the whole thing. In Metropolis, there's so that's a big part of my playing style, and I'll do that with anytime I can use some sort of open strings in the chord or ninths, I'll use it. If I'm playing a G or an F, I'll go D. So I'll put that 5th below a lot, and I'll try to have some sort of open string in there. And the other thing from Alex is kind of like using open strings as pedal notes as well as the chords are changing. So I'll do things like so that B kind of has that pedal tone, makes it, I don't know, it's a little more ominous sounding, and that's a big Rush sound. Right. It makes the guitar part certainly more interesting, and it helps to make the sound bigger, I think, as well. And of course, if you add chorusing and delay, then it's even, it's like your guitar sounds like a house when you do that. And if you have those open strings, that's a big part of it too. There's also another thing from Alex, the way that in Rush, the way they do these kind of unison, almost bluesy riffs. We have that a lot. Like, for example, in Sacrifice Sons, there's some of that going on. The riff goes like 1, 2, 3, 4. And we'll do those lines where the whole band, are doubling that, and it sounds really thick. And I just kind of remember some of the Rush songs from like the earlier albums, first album, where they have this. Here it is, slow. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 6, 5, 5, 3, 3. So it's like. One, 2, 3, 4. The weird thing about the odd times and stuff like that is, to me, I kind of feel the riff going by and the melody within the riff. Right. As far as counting it, that can change at any given time depending on how Mike is phrasing the part.
Right.
So I don't concern myself so much with how, like, the breakdown and how I'm feeling it. I concern myself with where the melody lies within the riff. We're kind of taking it, I think, to extremes sometimes where we keep changing the meters back and forth. But it definitely, for me, stemmed from listening to, the early Rush and the way they would do things. Most of the times, I think the way that it goes down is, you're right, we'll write a riff, and I mean this type of riff over here, that's just something that kind of comes out. We need something in F sharp, and there it is.
Right.
And you're not really thinking about the odd times. But then, again, there is a time where, as we're writing, we'll want to make it more interesting, and then we will start thinking about how to change it even further and change the times.
Right.
We'll say, is this better if it's all in 9, or should it alternate between 9 and 8? And then we'll try every different variation and mutation until we get something that really sounds right to all 5 members. A lot of times it's a matter of like compromises. Sometimes you have guys, I think it sounds all really good just all in 4,
Right.
And then another guy will be like, no, it has to alternate. So then how about at the end when it comes back, then it'll be, so we do things like that all the time. You kind of get all the different variations in there. As far as playing these type of riffs, there's a couple different ways you can feel it. I mean, one way, or I should say you can play it. One way is playing all alternating down, up, down, up, down, up.
Yeah.
And with a lot of the odd times, it gets a little confusing because sometimes you feel everything where the phrase starts on a down, and when it comes back around, it's still on a down. And sometimes when it comes back around, it's on an up. So you have to get used to being able to feel both, accenting with up and accenting with down.
Right.
So what I did for a long time in my practicing routine is that anything that I played, even if it was just a scale, like a part of a scale or something, I would play it 2 ways. And this is primarily from listening to Steve Morse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's where I got that whole thing, because he's such a technician. He's such an amazing guitar player. If I had to name my favorite guitar player, it would be Steve. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt about it. And I remember either watching him in a clinic or listening to a tape, and he kind of said that you should be prepared to be able to play something with down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up the whole time, or up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And they both feel different. So basically, whatever you practice, do it both ways. From the simplest thing, like a scale fragment. Even if you were just practicing that, as a warm-up, let's say. Mm-hmm. I started with down, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Then I would play the same thing starting with up. So obviously it sounds the same, but in your head, you can kind of get used to accenting the down and the up. So then when you're playing a riff that requires the meter to be modulating constantly and a constant down, up, you won't be thrown off,
right.
And you won't be tempted to play double down strokes.
Right.
Sometimes that sounds cool for certain things if you're trying to make it sound heavy, but if you want that consistent, clock type of thing, right. Then you have to be able to play both ways. That's how I practice. So anything, it could be the simplest things, little exercises. And that was all down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Then you would start with up. And it sounds exactly the same. I think I drove a lot of people crazy growing up, my family, in my room. Why are you playing the same thing over? And I'd be like, no, I'm not. It's different. You can't hear it, but it's different to me. If you were playing an arpeggio and alternate picking, starting with down and going, you have a little problem spot over here where you have to pick inside the strings. So that accented note, the D, it's very unnatural to play that with up. And there are some people, I've seen other people.
And then you have to come back with the down on a higher string.
Yeah.
So you're traveling further to come back over.
It kind of doesn't make sense. It's a lot easier to play that if you're starting with a down on the lower string.
Pick direction is.
Right. And then in those cases, then you start to do pull-offs and stuff to make it a little bit easier. And that feels the most natural to me. There's nothing weird about it. Right. So I guess the point is, with someone like Steve Morse, he can do that stuff so well, he sort of never gets stuck. So you have to practice those hard things. They're all like just four-string arpeggios, playing down, up, down, up, down, up. The rhythm underneath it that sets up the melody is the same rhythm that's going beneath the melody. So you can hear it. That's another example of trying to make the sound bigger, like I was talking about earlier with Rush. Just playing that chord, even I'm letting those notes kind of ring and fill up the space, basically. There's definitely something to be said for changing the tone of the guitar as you're playing. I think that adds to the expression. Right. I think that's something that's developed with time, most likely with players. Usually when you hear younger players, even players that have some technical ability, that part where the tone is changing and shaping, it takes a lot of maturity, I think. And talk about influences, I think Joe Satriani is a huge influence on me as far as that's concerned. I mean, not only melodically and technically, and his intonation is just unbelievable, but he changes the tone as he plays. He uses the wah-wah to do that. Right. He uses where he picks on the string to do that. Right. And that's really a big influence on me as well. Right. I like to play higher melodies on the neck pickup. And I think even within playing those higher melodies, if I want a note to sort of scream or get some sort of pinched harmonic, then I'll use the bridge pickup in the middle of a note even.
Right.
It kind of like that has to do with the amp, and you're almost playing the amp. And you're letting the gain interact. Also, in constructing a part like this, where I think that the melody is interesting. It's not just a straight melody. There are other notes involved where I'm outlining the chords. So you can hear the chords going by as I'm playing the melody, using open strings, and like you said, glisten. That's a total Steve Vai thing to me. When I'm kind of constructing things like that, he's like the king of interesting guitar. Everything that he comes out with is just, it grabs you. It's like, wow, I've never heard anybody do that before.
Right.
2 measures later, wow, I've never heard anybody do that before. From album to album to album, he continues that high level of creativity. And when I'm thinking about making a part like this, little pictures of Steve is going through my head. This is a riff from Pull Me Under. It's the main riff, and this is very influenced by Metallica, who is a huge influence not only on me but on the band. If I try to describe my band to people who haven't really heard us, I say it's kind of like a marriage of Yes and Metallica. So it's the instrumentation of Yes with 5 members and keyboards and the long songs and things like that, but with more of the sound of Metallica, which is a heavier guitar sound, heavier double bass drumming and stuff like that. So this riff uses a lot of just 2-note power chords. And I'm not even playing the root in a lot of cases. So if I'm playing, for example, what would be A to G, I only play the 5th and the octave. F sharp to G. There's a part where I have to go C sharp to G, and I play the root 5th, which is very evil tritone. And the other key to playing this type of thing is in the sound of the amp. You want to try to you don't want to have too much distortion because you want the low notes to be very tight. The way a friend of mine described it, it's like a steel pipe, being smashed against a brick building. Right?
Is it a particularly violent friend of yours, or no?
So the key to doing that is you have to roll off the gain on the amp. And the way I do that is I'll actually sit there and kind of play a note like that with one hand while I'm rolling off the gain. And you can hear when it starts to break up and sound fuzzy, and you kind of back it down. The other key to that is also to turn down the bass a little bit, depending on the amp. Some of my amps, some of the older boogies, the bass is like off or on like 1 or 2 to do that, depending on where the bass is in the gain stage. If it's before or after, it makes a difference.
Because you want the attack to be right there.
Right there.
Like immediately, not you got to wait.
No waiting. This isn't like a creamy, flubby thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is you have to, of course, mute the strings with your palm. And there's 2 things about that. One of them is putting your palm on the strings to mute. The other is to make your pick not don't be concerned about hitting all the strings at once. You almost want to scrape it across, like you get like that, so you can hear like the deadness of the sound. And this drives our keyboard player crazy because he can't tell what note it is. You know, if I'm playing, it's like, is that an F or is that an E? I can't, because the pitch comes up a little bit.
Yeah, right.
So here's the riff. So another thing that I'm doing to change up the tone is to add in pick harmonics, you know, by scraping the pick across the strings and then catching the harmonic with my thumb. And that changes the tone of the chord, where it sounds like you have a wah-wah changing the tone. So, for example, you know, I can just, that's just the pick straight on. It's almost not like a precision part where you're trying to get that clock thing going. This is more, you want really solid accents, and you want to retain the heaviness factor.
Okay.
So, yeah, you're right. There are double down picks to accommodate the odd times. The easiest way to play these types of fast-moving metric modulation things is to break them up into smaller bits. So you can think of it like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. It's hard for me to think of it that way because of where the melody notes are. I almost think of it like where the lower note is a pickup to the melody. Mm-hmm. That's the way I think of it. I don't think it's phrased that way.